Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching, so YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now let's begin. I'm a high school history teacher, 42 years old. I've been teaching American history for 16 years, and I grade papers in my home office most nights until around 10 or 11. The office window overlooks my neighbor's backyard. That's the only reason I noticed. His name is Derek Hollis. Mid-50s, works in pharmaceutical sales, drives a silver Lexus. We'd exchange waves when I was getting my mail, nothing more than that. Neighborly but distant. His backyard has always been immaculate. Professional landscaping, those river stones arranged in patterns, and about 9 or 10 garden statues scattered throughout. Life-sized human figures. Not angels or gnomes or anything whimsical. Just people. Anonymous faces, generic clothing. Standing, sitting, kneeling. I'd seen them 100 times and never thought twice about it. It was mid-October when I first noticed him moving them. I was grading quiz papers around 9:30, glancing out the window every so often to rest my eyes, and I saw Derek in his backyard with a flashlight. He was repositioning one of the statues, a standing woman near the back fence. He'd wrapped his arms around it and was sort of shuffling it a few feet to the left, setting it down carefully, then stepping back to look at it. The whole process took maybe 5 minutes. Then he went back inside. Odd time for landscaping, but people have their quirks. I went back to grading. The next night, same thing. Around 9:45 this time. Derek was out there moving a different statue, the kneeling man that had been near the bird bath. He dragged it closer to the house, maybe 8 feet from its original position. Again, very deliberate, very precise. He'd crouch down, adjust the angle slightly, stand back and examine it, make another micro-adjustment. By the third night, I started paying attention on purpose. I couldn't help it. There was something methodical about it that got under my skin. This time he moved 3 statues. The seated woman, a standing man with his hands at his sides, and another figure I couldn't make out clearly in the dark. Each one repositioned with the same strange care, like he was solving a puzzle only he could see. I started taking photos, just quick shots on my phone through the window. I told myself it was curiosity, nothing more than that. But honestly, I was already feeling something off about the whole thing. When you see someone doing the exact same inexplicable task every single night at the same time, it stops being quirky and starts being wrong. A week in, I had 7 photos on my phone, each from a different night. I laid them out on my desk one afternoon and compared them. Every statue had moved. Not dramatically, maybe a foot here, 2 feet there, a slight rotation, but they'd all shifted. And here's what made my stomach turn. They were moving inward. Slowly, incrementally, they were migrating from the edges of the yard toward the center, which happened to be the area directly across from my office window. I know what you're thinking. Why not just ask him about it? Here's why. It felt invasive. What was I going to say? Hey, Derek, I've been watching you through my window every night, and I think your gardening schedule is weird. It sounded absurd even in my head, but it kept happening every single night. By the second week, I could see the pattern clearly even without comparing photos. The statues were tightening into a loose semicircle, all of them facing roughly in my direction now, not precisely, not in a way that would be obvious to someone who wasn't paying attention, but I was paying attention. On the 16th night, I was counting by then, I watched Derek move the same statue twice. He repositioned it, went inside for maybe 10 minutes, then came back out and moved it again, just a few inches. The second adjustment seemed to be correcting the angle. That's when I decided I had to say something. I caught him the next afternoon when he was getting his mail. I kept it casual, asked how he was doing, mentioned I'd noticed he was doing some work in his yard. He smiled, friendly, normal, and said yeah, he'd been thinking about redesigning the space, maybe adding some flower beds. Then I asked about the statues. The statues, he said. What about them? You've been moving them around, I said. Every night. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of confusion, maybe concern. I haven't moved those in months, he said. They're set in concrete bases, permanent. I almost laughed. Derek, I've watched you. I've seen you out there moving them. You must be seeing someone else, he said. His tone was still friendly but firmer now. Those statues haven't moved. I pulled out my phone, showed him the photos, pointed out the dates, the timestamps, the clear differences in position. He looked at each one, his face unreadable, then handed my phone back. I don't know what to tell you, Robert, he said. I haven't touched them. I haven't. He went inside. I stood there in the street for a full minute, my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from disbelief. I'd just shown him photographic evidence, and he'd denied it to my face. Either he was lying or something else was happening. That night, I didn't grade papers. I sat at my desk and watched. Derek came out at 9:30 like clockwork, moved 2 statues, one near the roses, one by the back corner. Both of them shifted inward again, angled more directly at my window. He worked quickly, efficiently, then went back inside. I took photos of before and after. The next morning, I walked over and knocked on his door. He answered in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. I showed him the new photos, time-stamped from the night before. Clear, indisputable documentation of the statues in different positions. Look, I said. I don't know why you're lying about this, but I have proof. These photos are from last night. 9:37 and 9:52, same night, different positions. Derek looked at the photos, looked at me. His expression was gentle, almost pitying. Robert, he said, those statues haven't moved in 8 months. I think maybe you need to take a break from work. You're stressed. He closed the door. I stood on his porch, staring at the wood grain, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't imagining it. I had documentation, dozens of photos, timestamps, metadata, everything. But he was looking at the same evidence and seeing something different, or pretending to. By the 3rd week, I stopped trying to talk to him. The statues kept moving, every night. And now I started noticing something else. They weren't just moving inward, they were turning. Not all at once, not in a way you'd notice unless you were tracking it obsessively, which I was. But each night, each adjustment Derek made, the statues rotated a few degrees. The woman who'd been facing southeast was now facing east. The kneeling man who'd been angled toward the fence was now squared up toward the house, toward my window. I measured the angles using landmarks, the fence post, the bird bath, the corner of Derek's shed. Calculated the rotation each night. It was consistent, methodical. They were turning to face me. I stopped sleeping well. Started closing the blinds when I worked, but that felt worse somehow. Like I was giving them privacy to move freely. I'd catch myself pulling the blinds aside every few minutes to check, and they'd be there, silent and still and wrong. Look, I know how this sounds. I'm a rational person. I teach the Enlightenment. I explain empiricism to 16-year-olds. But rationality doesn't hold up when you're watching something impossible happen with perfect consistency and the only other witness denies reality to your face. On the 23rd night, I watched Derek move the last statue into position, a standing man with his arms at his sides, now placed dead center of the semicircle, maybe 15 feet from my window. Derek adjusted it with excruciating precision, stepping back and forth, making tiny rotations until it was exactly right. Then he stood there for a moment looking at his work, and I swear he smiled. When he went inside, I didn't move from my desk. I just sat there looking at them. 9 statues, arranged in a perfect semicircle, all of them facing my office window, all of them exactly aligned, like an audience waiting for a performance to begin. I turned off my desk lamp, sat in the dark and watched them for over an hour. They didn't move. Of course they didn't move. They were statues. But the way the moonlight hit them, the shadows on their faces, made it look like they were staring, waiting. I don't work in my office anymore. I grade papers in the kitchen now, at the table with my back to the wall. My wife asked why I moved my desk, and I told her the chair was hurting my back. The statues are still there. I checked this morning, still in that perfect semicircle, all of them facing where my office window used to glow every night until 10 or 11. I'm a mechanic. I work on cars all day, come home smelling like oil and metal shavings, and I'm not the kind of person who pays much attention to what my neighbors are doing. But about 2 months ago, something changed that, and I still don't sleep right. My garage faces the street, and I keep late hours out there, tinkering, organizing tools, sometimes just sitting with a beer after a long shift. The workbench light stays on until midnight most nights. Across the street, there's this pale yellow house where a woman lives alone. I'd seen her maybe twice in the 4 years I've lived here. Older, keeps to herself. That's all I knew. It started on a Tuesday in September. I was out in the garage around 11 replacing the alternator on my truck, and when I stood up to grab a socket wrench, I saw her, standing in the upstairs window. Center frame, perfectly still, wearing what looked like a white dress or nightgown. She was facing my direction. I didn't think much of it. People look out windows. I went back to work. But the next night, she was there again. Same window, same position, same white dress. I remember pausing with my hands on the hood of the truck, just staring back for a moment. She didn't move. Not even a shift in weight or a turn of the head. I told myself she was probably just zoned out, staring at nothing the way people do when they're tired. By the end of the week, it was every single night. I'd glance up and there she'd be. That white shape in the window, motionless, always facing my house. The dress never changed. I started noting the time. 11 p.m., 11:30, 12:15, didn't matter, she was always there. I mentioned it to my buddy Carlos when he came by to help me swap out brake pads. He laughed it off, said maybe she had insomnia, maybe she liked watching the neighborhood. But when he looked up and saw her himself, he went quiet. We both stood there in the driveway and she didn't move. Not for the entire 3 minutes we watched. "That's weird, man," Carlos said. "He didn't come back after that." I started feeling it in my chest when I'd go out to the garage, this low-level dread, like being watched by something that shouldn't be watching. I'd catch myself looking up every few minutes, and she'd always be there. Same spot, same angle. I couldn't see her face clearly from that distance, but the dress was always stark white against the dark room behind her. 3 weeks in, I started losing it a little. I couldn't focus on work. I'd come home and sit in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes, staring at that window before I could make myself go inside. One night I didn't even turn the garage light on. I sat in the dark and watched her window. She appeared anyway, at exactly 11:03. The light in her room came on, and there she was, white dress, same position. Here's the thing. I never saw her move into position. She was just suddenly there when the light came on, like she'd been standing in the dark, waiting for it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't even her. Maybe it was a mannequin or a dress form, something she kept near the window for some reason. That almost made me feel better. Almost. Then, about 5 weeks in, I snapped. I was out in the garage and I'd had a few beers, and when I looked up and saw her there again, I walked to the end of my driveway and shouted. Not words really, just a loud, frustrated noise. Then I yelled, "What do you want?" Nothing. The figure didn't move. The window stayed exactly the same. I stood there, breathing hard, feeling like an idiot. My voice echoed down the empty street. A dog barked 3 houses down. The figure in the window didn't react at all. I went back inside and didn't go into the garage for 2 days. When I finally did, she was there. Of course she was. That's when I started noticing something else. The light in that room never changed. It was always the same dim, yellowish glow, not bright, not dark, just constant. And I realized I had never, not once in 5 weeks, seen that light turn off. Even during the day, if I looked carefully, I could make out that faint glow behind the curtains. I started keeping a log. I know how that sounds. But I wrote down every time I saw her, the date, the time, the exact position. It was always identical, the angle of her shoulders, the way the white fabric hung, everything. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? My neighbor stands in her window at night? That's not a crime. 6 weeks in, I saw a car pull up to her house. A younger guy got out, mid-30s maybe, carrying a duffel bag. He knocked, then used a key. Her son, I assumed. I watched him go inside. The front door closed. I waited. The figure was still in the window. 5 minutes later, lights started coming on throughout the house. First floor, then the kitchen, then what looked like a bedroom on the second floor. Each time a light came on, I could see movement through the windows, the son walking around, probably checking on his mother. But the figure in the center window didn't move. She stayed exactly where she'd been for 6 weeks, white dress glowing in that unchanging yellow light, facing my house. Then the sun turned on the light in her room, the room where she was standing. I saw it happen. The overhead light clicked on, much brighter than the ambient glow that had been there before, and I could see the whole room clearly for the first time. She was still there, but so was the sun. He walked past the figure in the white dress, walked right past it, not reacting, not acknowledging it at all. He moved to the far side of the room, out of my line of sight, and the white figure remained in the center of the frame, motionless. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put down the wrench I was holding. The sun came back into view, carrying what looked like a blanket. He moved around the room, straightened something on a dresser, looked at his phone. Normal actions. But the white figure didn't turn toward him, didn't acknowledge him. It kept facing my direction. Then he turned the light off. The room went dark for maybe 2 seconds, and when that dim yellow glow came back, because it always came back, the white figure was still there, in the exact same position. I watched the son leave 20 minutes later. He got in his car, pulled out of the driveway and drove away. The figure stayed in the window. I haven't been in my garage at night since then. That was 4 days ago. I come home, I park in the driveway, and I go straight inside without looking up. But this morning, I had to grab something from the garage in daylight, and I couldn't help myself. I looked up at that window. The curtains were open. The room was empty except for a dress form in the center wearing a white nightgown. Just a mannequin. That's all it was. But I've been sitting here trying to convince myself that makes it better, and it doesn't. Because I know what I saw. I know the sun walked past it. I know that light never turns off. And I keep thinking about how she never moved. Not once in 6 weeks. Not even when I shouted. Because if it was just a dress form the whole time, then who was turning that light on every night at 11 p.m.? I'm a civil engineer. I work with measurements, load calculations, building codes. Everything in my world has to make sense structurally, mathematically. So when I bought the house on Ridgecrest Lane, it was specifically because the property felt logical. Half an acre, mature trees for privacy, soil composition that wouldn't shift. I didn't want neighbors close enough to hear through walls. I wanted space. The lot next to mine had been empty for 3 years. Then Marcus moved in. I met him the day he arrived, standing at the property line between our houses. He was shorter than me by maybe 4 inches, mid-50s, with hands that looked like they'd spent decades doing manual labor. We exchanged the usual pleasantries. He mentioned he worked from home, didn't specify doing what. I didn't ask. 2 weeks later, he started building the fence. It went up in sections, 8 feet tall, solid cedar planks with no gaps between them. No posts visible from my side, just a seamless wall of dark wood that ran exactly parallel to the property line. He worked on it every morning, methodical and quiet. I watched from my kitchen window sometimes, coffee in hand, and noticed he never seemed to measure anything. Just hammered and fitted each board like he'd memorized the dimensions. The fence stretched from the back corner of his property all the way to the front, maybe 200 feet total. But here's what didn't make sense. It didn't connect to anything. It just ended abruptly at both points, no gate, no opening. You couldn't walk through it or around it without going significantly out of your way. It served no practical purpose I could determine. And the height was wrong. Code in our county allows 6 feet maximum for boundary fences without a variance permit. 8 feet requires approval, paperwork, neighbor notification. I never received anything. I thought about saying something. I didn't. The day after he finished, the scraping started. It was rhythmic, consistent. Metal on dirt, or maybe wood on dirt, hard to tell. It happened during the day, mostly, sometimes bleeding into early evening, never at night. I'd be working in my home office and hear it through the wall. Patient, repetitive strokes like someone digging or smoothing something out. It didn't sound rushed. It didn't sound like normal yard work. I saw Marcus a few times during those first couple weeks. He'd be out front, checking his mailbox or getting into his truck, always wearing the same faded work clothes, always covered in a fine layer of dust. I waved once. He nodded back but didn't smile. The fence cast a shadow across my side yard that lasted most of the day. My grass started dying in that strip, about 6 feet wide, just withered and browned, despite the irrigation system working fine everywhere else. The darkness felt heavier than it should have been, denser somehow. I'd walk past it going to my car and feel this pressure, like the air was different there. One afternoon, I stood directly beside the fence and listened. The scraping was louder, more defined. Definitely metal, definitely dirt. And underneath it, something else. Breath, maybe. Controlled and steady, like someone focusing hard on a repetitive task. I knocked on the wood. "Marcus, everything okay over there?" The scraping stopped immediately. No response. No footsteps.
Just sudden, complete silence. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then went back inside. The scraping resumed 5 minutes later, same rhythm, same pace, like it had never stopped.
I started avoiding that side of the house. I'd park in the front driveway instead of the side, take the long way around to get my mail, but I couldn't avoid hearing it. The scraping became background noise, constant and inescapable. It was there when I woke up, there when I worked, there when I tried to read in the evening. I called the county planning office, asked about fence permits for my address block. The woman on the phone checked the records, said nothing had been filed for my street in the past 6 months. I didn't push it. I told myself it wasn't worth the confrontation. Look, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just go over there, knock on his front door, ask him what he was doing? Here's why. Every time I thought about it, my body reacted before my brain could catch up. My hands would start sweating. My breathing would get shallow. There was something about Marcus, about the fence, about the whole situation that triggered something primal. Fear without a clear source. 3 weeks in, I realized I'd never seen him taller than the fence line. I'd see him out front, always slightly hunched, always moving with his head down. I'd see his truck leave in the morning sometimes, come back in the afternoons. But I never saw him walking upright near the fence, never saw the top of his head clear those 8-foot boards, and I'm 6'1". He was shorter than me. The math didn't work unless he was deliberately staying low, crouched, or bent. The scraping got deeper. I don't know how else to describe it. The sound changed pitch, became more resonant, like the source was farther down than it should have been. Sometimes I'd press my ear against the fence just to confirm I wasn't imagining it, and I'd feel vibration through the wood, not surface level, deep. I borrowed a ladder from my garage, 8-foot aluminum extension ladder I used maybe twice a year for gutter cleaning. I set it up against the fence on a Saturday morning when I knew Marcus's truck was gone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost knocked the whole thing over. I climbed up slow, one rung at a time. The top of the fence came level with my chest when I reached the second-to-last step. I could see over if I stood on my toes. The scraping had stopped again. Everything was still. I looked over. His yard was empty. No grass, no landscaping, just exposed dirt. And in the center, running parallel to the fence line, was a pit, maybe 4 feet wide, stretching the entire 200 feet from front to back. But it wasn't the width that made my stomach drop. It was the depth. I couldn't see the bottom. The edges were perfectly vertical, the walls smooth and precise, like they'd been cut with machinery. But there was no machinery. Just a shovel leaning against the fence, caked in clay-dark soil. And the pit kept going down into darkness that shouldn't have been possible given our water table, our bedrock depth, our everything. I heard breathing behind me. I turned my head and Marcus was standing at ground level on his side, looking up at me. His face was expressionless, streaked with dirt. His eyes were the color of the pit. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, holding a pickaxe I hadn't noticed before, waiting. I got down from the ladder so fast I nearly fell, dragged it back to my garage and didn't come out for the rest of the day. The scraping hasn't stopped. It's been 6 weeks now and it's still going, same rhythm, same patient consistency. I measured the sound one night with a decibel meter just to prove to myself it was real. 42 decibels, constant, background conversation level. Enough to never forget it's there. I don't look over the fence anymore. I don't stand near it. I've started keeping my curtains drawn on that side of the house. Sometimes at night I hear the dirt hitting the surface, soil being hauled up from somewhere deep. I don't know how deep. I don't think I want to know. Marcus waves at me sometimes when I'm getting my mail.
friendly, normal, covered in dust that never quite washes off. I'm putting the house on the market next month. I've already contacted a realtor. They asked if there were any disclosure issues they should know about. I said no. I don't know how to explain a fence that shouldn't exist and a hole that doesn't end. I don't know how to tell them I can hear it right now through the walls, patient and endless. I'm telling you this because I need someone else to know what I saw. I don't care if you believe me. My name's Stephen Miller. I'm 29, I work at a coffee shop downtown, and for the past 8 months I've been renting this basement apartment in an old Victorian in the suburbs. The rent was stupidly cheap, $700 a month, utilities included, which should have been my first clue, but I was broke and it was a roof over my head. My landlady, Mrs. Halstead, lived directly above me. Alone, as far as I could tell. She was probably in her late 70s, small and hunched with these watery blue eyes that never quite focused on you when she spoke. The floorboards were thin. I could hear everything. Her shuffling footsteps at odd hours, the creak of her rocking chair, the television murmuring at all hours of the night. I got used to it pretty quickly. White noise, basically. Part of living cheap. But about 2 months in, I started hearing her voice. At first, I thought she was on the phone. Long, one-sided conversations that went on for 20-30 minutes at a time. Except her tone was wrong. She wasn't chatting. She was pleading, apologizing. I'd be lying on my couch, watching something on my laptop, and I'd hear her upstairs, voice rising and falling in this desperate rhythm. Please, I didn't mean it. I'll leave, I promise. Just give me until morning. I know I said that before, but this time I mean it. I felt bad for her. I figured maybe she had family, an abusive son or daughter maybe, calling to harass her about moving into assisted living or signing over the house. Old people get taken advantage of all the time. I even thought about saying something to her, offering to help somehow, but we barely spoke as it was. She'd slip my rent receipt under the door, and that was about it. The conversations got more frequent. 3, 4 times a week, always late, 10, 11 at night, and always the same frantic tone, like she was negotiating for her life. I started catching fragments through the floorboards. I've been good, haven't I? You said you'd give me more time. Once, very clearly. I can't leave. I have nowhere to go. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just go upstairs and check on her? Here's the thing. I didn't want to embarrass her. Old people are proud. If she was having some kind of mental health episode, me barging in wouldn't help. And honestly, part of me didn't want to get involved. I had my own problems. Work was brutal, I was barely scraping by, and the last thing I needed was to become the caretaker for some declining old woman who wasn't even really my landlord anymore. She'd inherited the place from her dead husband and clearly didn't know what to do with it. But it kept happening, and it got worse. One night I woke up to her voice directly overhead. My bedroom was right under hers, and I could hear every word. She was crying. Not loud sobbing, but this quiet, broken weeping that made my chest feel tight. And she was talking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. A pause then. Please don't make me go down there. I can't go down there again. I sat up in bed. My mouth was dry. The room felt too small suddenly, like the walls were closer than they should be. She kept talking. I'll be better. I'll do exactly what you want. Just please don't hurt me. I got out of bed, stood there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. I could see the boards flexing slightly under her weight as she moved around. The weeping continued for maybe another minute. then stopped abruptly. Footsteps, the creak of her chair. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning I went upstairs and knocked. No answer. I waited, knocked again. Finally I heard her shuffling toward the door. When she opened it, she looked the same as always, pale, vaguely confused, like she'd just woken up from a nap. I asked if she was okay. She blinked at me. Of course, dear, why wouldn't I be?
I didn't know what to say. She was acting completely normal. I mumbled something about hearing noises, and she waved me off. Old house, she said. Settles at night, nothing to worry about. I wanted to push, but her eyes had that distant look again, like she wasn't really seeing me, so I left. 2 weeks later, I found the loose board. Was lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling because I couldn't sleep. She'd been at it again for the past hour, that same desperate pleading, and I noticed a small gap between two planks directly above my head. The wood had warped, pulling away from the nails. If I stood on my bed, I could probably see through it. I told myself not to. It was a violation of privacy, creepy, wrong. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next time I heard her voice, I got up, pushed my bed a few inches to the left so I was directly under the gap, climbed up. My hands were shaking. I remember that detail because I had to grip the bed frame to steady myself. The gap was maybe half an inch wide, just enough. I put my eye to it and looked up. She was sitting in her rocking chair, facing away from me. I could see the back of her head, her thin white hair, her bony shoulders. The room was dim, just one lamp in the corner, but I could make out shapes. And then she leaned forward, and I saw them. Dolls. Dozens of them, arranged in a perfect semicircle around her chair. Small, handmade things, maybe 6 inches tall, with fabric bodies and stitched faces. They were all identical. Same size, same shape, same blank expressions, and they were all facing her. She was talking to them. "I know you're angry," she said. Her voice was calm now, measured like she was addressing a courtroom. "I know what I did, but I had reasons. You have to understand. I had reasons." She rocked slowly, hands folded in her lap. The dolls didn't move, obviously, but the way she was looking at them, it was like she expected them to respond. "I'll make it right," she continued. "I just need more time, please. Just a little more time." I don't know how long I stood there. My legs were cramping, my neck ached from the angle, but I couldn't look away. She reached down and picked up one of the dolls, held it close to her face, stared at it for a long moment. Then she started to cry again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She placed the doll back in the semicircle, adjusted its position slightly so it was perfectly aligned with the others. Then she stood up, her knees cracking loud enough that I heard it through the floorboards, and walked out of my line of sight. I climbed down, sat on the edge of my bed. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Look, I don't know what I saw. I don't know if she was just a lonely old woman talking to dolls because she had no one else, or if there was something worse happening. But here's what I can't get out of my head. When she picked up that doll, when she held it close and apologized, her expression wasn't sad. It was terrified, like the doll was the one in control. I moved out 2 weeks later, broke the lease, lost my deposit, didn't care. Told Mrs. Halstead I got a job in another city. She nodded, said she understood, and handed me a final receipt. Her hands were covered in needle marks, fresh ones. I didn't ask why. I didn't I'm in a new place now. Normal rent, normal landlord, normal floors that don't creak. But sometimes, late at night, I hear shuffling above me, just for a second, and I have to remind myself that it's impossible, that I'm on the top floor, that there's nothing above me but the roof. I'm going to tell you about my neighbor, and I need you to understand I'm not someone who jumps to conclusions. I manage logistics at a distribution center, third shift, 11 to 7, and insomnia has been part of my life since my 20s. I've seen plenty of odd things at 3 in the morning. This was different. His name was Gerald Gremmer, retired postal worker, lived in the house diagonal from mine for as long as I'd been in the neighborhood. Quiet guy. We'd wave sometimes when I was leaving for work and he was getting his paper. Normal interactions. Nothing that would prepare me for what started happening last April. I first noticed him on a Tuesday night. I'd gotten home around 7:30, tried to sleep, failed as usual, and ended up at my kitchen table with coffee around 3:15. My kitchen window faces his front yard. There's a street light that makes everything visible enough. That's when I saw him sitting in a lawn chair on his grass, maybe 15 feet from his front door. Just sitting there, staring at his own living room window. I figured he couldn't sleep either. Older people have their routines. Maybe the fresh air helped him. I went back to scrolling on my phone. But the next night, same thing, 3:05 in the morning, and there he was in that same chair, same position, hands on his knees, back straight, head tilted slightly up toward that dark window. His lights were off inside, the whole house was dark. He was just sitting there in his pajamas and a robe looking at nothing. By the 4th night, I started paying closer attention. I'm not proud of it, but I couldn't help it. Something about the stillness bothered me. He didn't move. Not once in the 40 minutes I watched before I forced myself to go try sleeping again. Didn't shift in his seat, didn't check his phone, didn't scratch his face. Nothing. I told myself it was meditation or some kind of sleep disorder therapy. People do weird things for health reasons. I let it go. Then it rained. I was at the window again. This had become a habit by then, checking to see if he'd be there, and I watched him come out of his side door around 2:55. He was carrying the chair and a towel. The rain wasn't heavy, just steady spring drizzle, and I thought finally, okay, he's not going to sit out in this. But he set the chair down in the exact same spot on the lawn, maybe 2 feet from where the grass was getting muddy, and he wiped it down. Methodically. Every part of that cheap plastic chair, even the legs. Then he folded the towel, went back inside, and came out a minute later in his robe. And he sat down in the rain. Same position, same angle toward his window, water soaking into his clothes and hair. He didn't flinch, didn't wipe his face. Just sat there while the rain ran down his neck and darkened his robe. I stood up from my table. My coffee had gone cold in my hand, and I didn't remember putting it down. I moved closer to my window, close enough that my breath fogged the glass. He was maybe 40 feet away. I could see his expression in the streetlight. Not peaceful, not meditative, tense. His jaw was set and his hands were gripping his knees hard enough that I could see the white of his knuckles. He sat there for an hour and 12 minutes. I know because I checked my phone twice, thought about going to bed, and couldn't make myself leave the window. When he finally stood up, he moved like someone much older than he was. Stiff, slow. He picked up the chair, carried it back to his side door, and went inside. The house stayed dark. I didn't sleep that night. Look, I should have talked to him, asked if he was okay. That's what a decent neighbor does. But something stopped me every time I thought about it. I can't explain it better than this. It felt like interrupting something private, something I wasn't supposed to see.
The rain stopped for a few days. He went back to his regular routine, if you can call it that, every night between 3 and 4, sitting in that chair. I started documenting it without meaning to. 3:02 one night, 2:58 the next, never later than 3:10, never earlier than 2:55.
I tried to see what he was looking at through his window. During the day, when I had time before work, I walked past his house and glanced in. Normal living room, couch, TV, bookshelf. Nothing unusual. Nothing positioned where he'd be staring. Then I noticed the woman. It was a Thursday. I was at my window at 2:45 because I'd given up pretending I wasn't going to watch. The side door opened at 2:53, but it wasn't Grammar who came out first. It was a woman, maybe early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. I'd never seen her before. She carried the chair out, set it down in the same spot, went back inside. Grammar came out a minute later, walked right past the chair, and stood about 10 feet behind it in the grass closer to the street facing his house. The woman came back out, sat down in the chair, same rigid posture, same angle toward the window, and Grammar just stood there behind her, watching. Not the window this time. He was looking at my house. I stepped back from my window so fast I knocked my mug off the table. It shattered on the tile and I didn't move to clean it up. When I looked again, carefully, from further back in my kitchen, he was still staring in my direction. The woman hadn't moved, hadn't turned around. She just sat there while he stood behind her in the dark. I don't know how long I stood there pressed against my refrigerator. Long enough that my legs started aching. When I finally looked again, they were both gone. The chair was still on the lawn, empty. I called in sick to work that night, first time in 3 years. I sat in my living room with all the lights off and the curtains closed, and I didn't go near any windows. My phone was in my hand for hours. I pulled up the non-emergency police number 4 times. What would I even say? My neighbor sits outside at night? Sometimes someone else sits there. They're not doing anything illegal. The next morning I saw Grammar getting his newspaper. He waved at me, same friendly wave he had always done. I waved back. My hand was shaking. I haven't seen the woman again. Grammar's still out there most nights. I don't watch from the kitchen anymore. I've started closing my blinds before it gets dark. But 2 nights ago, I was coming home from work just before 8 in the morning, and I saw the chair on the lawn. It was facing my house this time. Empty. Just turned around, pointed at my front door. When I got inside, I checked from my bedroom window. The chair was back in its normal position, facing Grammar's window. I don't know when he moved it. I was only inside for maybe 20 seconds. I've thought about moving. I've looked at apartments. But here's what stops me. I keep thinking about that woman's face. The glimpse I got of it in the streetlight. She wasn't scared. She wasn't uncomfortable. She looked exactly like Grammar always looked. Tense, focused, like she was waiting for something to appear in that window, like it was her job to watch. And I keep thinking about the fact that Grammar wasn't watching the window anymore that night. He'd passed that job to someone else, which means he was free to watch something new, someone new, and he chose me. I'm a museum curator, which means I travel a lot for exhibitions and acquisitions. My neighbor Dave, early 60s, retired postal worker, had been watching my house for years whenever I was away. We had that easy, unspoken arrangement you develop over time. I'd leave him a key, he'd water my plants, bring in the mail, make sure everything looked lived in. Never had a single problem.
I got back from a 2-week trip to Prague on a Tuesday afternoon. The flight had been brutal, and I was already thinking about collapsing into bed when I saw the note tucked under my windshield wiper. White printer paper, folded twice. Dave's handwriting, that careful, precise script you'd expect from someone who'd spent 30 years sorting mail. Gary, someone broke into your house on Thursday night. 11:47 p.m. White male, approximately 5'10", medium build, wearing a dark blue hoodie and jeans. He went in through your back door, lock looked forced, and was inside for roughly 18 minutes. He left carrying what appeared to be a small black bag. Thought you should know. Dave. I read it twice standing there in my driveway. Then I checked my watch, like that would somehow change what the note said. Thursday night, that was 9 days ago. That. The back door lock was definitely damaged. Scratches around the deadbolt, the frame slightly splintered. I stepped inside carefully, already pulling out my phone to call the police, but then I stopped. Nothing looked disturbed. My laptop was still on the coffee table. The TV was there. My grandmother's silverware in the dining room cabinet, untouched. I went through every room, nothing missing that I could identify. I called Dave. He answered on the second ring, sounded pleased to hear from me. Hey Gary, good trip? Dave, I got your note. Oh, right. Yeah, wanted to make sure you knew about that. Why didn't you call the police? There was a pause. Not the confused kind, the careful kind. Well, he was already gone by the time I realized what was happening. Didn't seem like there was much point. You watched someone break into my house for 18 minutes. I wrote down everything I saw. Figured that would be more helpful than getting police involved after the fact. You know how that goes. Paperwork, questions. They probably wouldn't have caught him anyway. My kitchen was visible from Dave's living room window. So was my back door. I'd never really thought about that before. The note says 11:47. That's very specific. I happened to check the time, wanted to give you accurate information, and you watched him for 18 minutes. I wanted to see if he'd take anything valuable, so I could tell you what to look for. He sounded reasonable. Helpful even. Did he get anything important? I can't find anything missing. Huh. Maybe he got spooked, or maybe he was looking for something specific. I thanked him and hung up. My hands were shaking slightly as I set down the phone. I went back through the house more carefully. This time I wasn't looking for what was gone. I was looking for what was different. In my bedroom, the closet door was open. I always close it. Always. The bathroom medicine cabinet had been moved slightly off-center from its usual position. In my office, one of my desk drawers wasn't quite flush. Someone had gone through my things methodically, carefully, putting everything back almost exactly as they'd found it. The kind of search that takes time. 18 minutes of time. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the neighborhood Facebook group on my laptop. Scrolled back to Thursday, 9 days ago. Nothing. No posts about suspicious activity, break-ins, strange vehicles. I checked the local police blotter. Nothing in my area. Dave had watched someone break into my house, made notes about the experience, and then waited 9 days to mention it. I started thinking about other trips. The one in March where I came home and couldn't find my spare car keys for a week, then found them in a different drawer than I always kept them. The conference in June where my mail had been stacked differently than Dave usually stacked it. Little things that felt wrong, but that I'd dismissed because nothing was missing, nothing was damaged. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dave sitting in his living room with the lights off, watching my house. Watching someone move through my rooms, opening my drawers, touching my things, noting the time, counting the minutes, describing the intruder in detail like he was documenting an experiment.
I installed security cameras the next day, covered the back door, the driveway, the side yard. When Dave saw me putting them up, he came over. Good idea. Can't be too careful. Yeah. You report that break-in to the police?
I did. I hadn't. They find anything useful? They're looking into it.
They did.
He nodded slowly, hands in his pockets. Well, if anything else happens, I've still got your spare key. I can keep an eye out. Actually, I'm going to change the locks. But thanks. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger exactly. More like disappointment. Suit yourself. Just trying to be a good neighbor.
He walked back to his house. I watched him go, then looked up at his living room window. From there, he would have had a perfect view of the intruder working on my back door lock, would have seen the light from the flashlight or phone moving through my rooms, would have been able to time everything precisely because he'd been watching the entire time, undistracted, focused. I checked the cameras obsessively for weeks. Nothing unusual, but I started noticing other things. How Dave's living room light would flick off whenever I pulled into my driveway after dark. How his curtain would move sometimes when I was bringing in groceries. How he'd mention specific things about my schedule that I didn't remember telling him. I travel less now, and when I do, I don't tell Dave I'm leaving. I just go. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about him sitting in his dark living room, watching my empty house, waiting to see if anything interesting will happen, waiting to observe and document whatever comes next. And I think about how he probably watched me reading his note that first day, watched me checking the locks, watched me realize something was deeply wrong. How he took notes on that too, probably, about how long it took me to understand. 18 minutes maybe. Could have been less. I'm a book restorer. I work from home, mostly alone, handling old manuscripts and damaged bindings for private collectors and small museums. It's quiet work, solitary. I like it that way. My name's Evan Scott. I'm 39, and until about 4 months ago, I would have told you I appreciated routine, predictability, the small pleasures of a well-ordered life. I live in a duplex in a neighborhood that's mostly retirees and young families. My neighbor, Walter, moved into the unit beside mine last spring. I'd see him occasionally. Older guy, maybe mid-60s, always wore the same brown cardigan, always nodded politely if we crossed paths, never said much. I appreciated that too. The first gift appeared on a Tuesday morning in late June. I opened my door to get the mail and nearly stepped on it. A single pencil, the wood-cased kind, sharpened to a perfect point, placed carefully on the welcome mat. No note, no explanation. I figured someone had dropped it, picked it up, tossed it in the kitchen junk drawer without thinking much about it. The second one came 3 days later. A rubber band. Not wrapped around anything, just lying there on the mat, clean and new. I threw it away. Then a battery. AA, still in its plastic packaging. Look, I know how this sounds. Random stuff appearing on a porch isn't exactly terrifying, but the frequency started to bother me. Every 2 or 3 days, something new. Always small, always mundane. A paperclip, a twist tie, a single thumbtack, point down, placed with what felt like deliberate care so I wouldn't step on it. Mentioned it to Walter once, casually, when I saw him getting his mail. Asked if he'd noticed anyone leaving things around. He looked at me for a second. Not long, just long enough that I felt something cold move through my chest, and said no, he hadn't noticed anything unusual. The gifts kept coming.
Here's where it gets harder to explain without sounding paranoid.
I was working on a restoration job, a leather-bound edition from the 1890s, and I'd been using the same bookmark for weeks, a torn piece of cardstock, when it finally disintegrated. I made a mental note to find a proper replacement, closed up for the night, and the next morning there was a fabric bookmark on my mat. Plain blue ribbon, the exact width I prefer for that kind of work. Coincidence, right? That's what I told myself. 2 weeks later, I was straining my eyes over some water-damaged pages under my lamp. Hadn't mentioned it to anyone, hadn't posted about it, just sat there squinting and rubbing at my face because the print was so degraded. The next morning, a small bottle of eye drops, the kind I use, the exact brand. My hands are shaking right now, just thinking about it. I started keeping a list. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it written down to believe it was actually happening. A safety pin appeared the same morning a button came loose on my work shirt. A pack of tissues showed up the day after I'd had a sneezing fit from dust in an old manuscript. A single cough drop, the honey lemon kind I prefer, arrived the morning after I'd stayed up late and my throat felt raw. The items were never elaborate, never expensive, just small, practical things that answered needs I'd barely registered myself. I stopped going out to check the porch in the morning, started waiting until afternoon, sometimes evening, hoping that if I delayed long enough the pattern would break. It never did. Whatever I needed, it would be there. Waiting. I installed a camera, cheap motion sensor thing from a hardware store, aimed right at my door. The footage showed Walter. Every time. He'd approach between 2 and 4 in the morning, move with this careful, unhurried precision, place the item, and leave. Never looked at the camera, never hesitated. His face in the grainy night vision was calm, almost serene. I confronted him. I don't know what I expected, denial maybe, or some confused explanation. I knocked on his door one evening, and when he answered, I just said it straight. "I know you've been leaving things on my porch. I need you to stop." He smiled, not in a threatening way. It was gentle, almost paternal. "You needed them," he said. "That's not the point. You're watching me. How are you even knowing what I need?" "I pay attention," he said. "Most people don't, but I do." I told him if it happened again, I'd call the police. He nodded, still smiling, and closed the door. The gifts stopped. For 3 days, nothing appeared. I felt this weird mixture of relief and something else I couldn't name, a kind of absence, like a noise you'd gotten used to suddenly going quiet. On the 4th morning, I woke up and knew immediately something was wrong, not because of a sound or a feeling, but because when I went to make coffee, the filters were exactly where I'd left them, but the specific one I'd been about to use, crumpled slightly on one edge from how I'd grabbed the box the night before, was sitting on the counter, already in the machine, ready to go. I hadn't done that. I checked every lock, every window. Nothing disturbed, no signs of entry, but my apartment felt different. Like someone had been inside, moving through my space with that same careful precision, studying, anticipating. I went to Walter's door, knocked. No answer. I haven't seen him since. His car's still in the driveway. His lights go on and off at regular intervals. But he doesn't come to the door, doesn't collect his mail. When I walk past his windows, I can feel him there, watching, but I never see him. The gifts haven't come back, but other things have started happening. Small things. My favorite mug is always clean, even when I'm certain I left it dirty. books I'm working on are bookmarked at exactly the page I need, even though I know I didn't mark them. Once I found my reading glasses cleaned and placed on my desk in the morning, and I know they'd been smudged and sitting on the kitchen counter when I went to bed. I've thought about moving. I've thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? My neighbor was leaving me useful items, and now I think he's breaking in to do my chores. I called a locksmith last week, had every lock changed, installed a deadbolt. It didn't matter. This morning I woke up to find a Band-Aid on my bathroom counter. I'd gotten a paper cut yesterday while working, hadn't treated it, hadn't even thought about it after the initial sting. The Band-Aid was the right size, the fabric kind I prefer. I don't know what Walter wants or what this is or how to make it stop. I just know that every single day I'm proving to him that I need things: water, food, sleep, comfort, and he's somewhere close, watching, cataloging, learning exactly what kind of care I require. And eventually, I think, he's going to decide the only way to really take care of me is to never let me leave at all. I've been an insurance adjuster for 18 years, and I'm telling you this because I need someone else to know what I saw, even if I can't prove any of it. Paul Hendricks. That's me. 42, divorced, live in a decent neighborhood in Millbrook where people mow their lawns and wave at each other. After that storm last October, the one that knocked out power for 3 days, I got assigned maybe 60 claims in my zip code alone. One of them was for Dennis Volkert, 3 houses down from mine. I'd seen him around for years. Quiet guy, kept to himself, always doing yard work. He'd lived there since the 90s, I think. His basement had flooded. Standard stuff. I called ahead, showed up on a Thursday morning with my camera and clipboard. Dennis answered the door in paint-stained jeans and a flannel shirt, looking nervous. I mean, people are usually stressed during claims, but this was different. His hands were shaking when he poured me coffee. The water came up about 4 inches, he said. Ruined some boxes. The sump pump failed. I told him I needed to document everything, get photos for the file. Standard procedure. He walked me through the kitchen, down a narrow staircase. The basement smelled like mildew and something else, something earthy and stale. As soon as I reached the bottom step, I noticed the floor. Concrete, but not uniform. The entire basement floor was covered in patches, rectangular sections where new concrete had clearly been poured at different times. Some were darker, some lighter, different textures. I counted maybe 15, 20 patches, all roughly the same size. 4 feet by 6 feet, give or take, scattered across the floor like a patchwork quilt, with thin gaps where the sections met. I crouched down, took a photo. Dennis moved fast, faster than I'd ever seen him move. "You don't need pictures of the floor," he said. His voice had gone tight. I looked up at him. "I need to document water damage to all surfaces. That's protocol." "The floor's fine, it's just concrete." "Yeah, but..." I gestured at the patches. "Why is it all different? Looks like you've been repairing it over the years." He didn't answer right away, just stood there blocking the stairs. I noticed his jaw working, like he was chewing the inside of his cheek. "Old foundation issues," he finally said. "I've patched cracks. Settling. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I've been in hundreds of basements, and I'd never seen anything like this. Each patch was too uniform, too deliberate, and they weren't in places where you'd expect foundation cracks. They were spread out evenly, almost like a grid. I stood up,
moved toward the corner where some cardboard boxes sat on a metal shelf. Water had warped the bottom ones. I took a few photos, then noticed the gardening tools leaning against the wall. A shovel, a pickaxe, both caked in dried mud. I'm not a gardener, but I know dirt when I see it. This wasn't the sandy, light-colored soil from around here. This was dark, clay-heavy, the kind of soil you'd find deeper down. "You do a lot of gardening?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Some." I glanced at the small basement window. You could see his backyard from there. All grass, a couple of shrubs, nothing that would require a pickaxe. My hands had started sweating. That's when I saw the calendar. It was hanging on the far wall above an old workbench. Not a current calendar. This one was from 2009. I walked over and Dennis tensed behind me. "Don't need to photograph that," he said. But I was already looking at it. Certain dates were circled in red marker. March 14th, July 22nd, October 9th. I felt something cold slide down my spine because those dates meant something to me. I couldn't place them immediately, but they felt familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. "What's this for?" I asked. "Project dates, home repairs." He stepped closer, reaching for the calendar. I moved back, pulling out my phone, pretending to check a message. I snapped a photo of the calendar without looking at the screen. Dennis saw me do it. His face changed. The nervous energy drained away, replaced by something flat and cold. "I think we're done here," he said. "I still need to document the walls, check for..." "I'll pay you." I stopped. "What?" "Cash. To leave the basement out of your report. Say the damage was minimal, just some boxes. I'll pay you $10,000. The air in that basement got very thin. Look, I've had people try to inflate claims, exaggerate damage, but I've never had someone offer me money to downplay it. And $10,000? For a flooded basement claim that would maybe pay out $2,000, $3,000. Mr. Volkert, I can't do that. His hand went to his pocket. For a second, and I know how this sounds, I thought he was going for a weapon, but he pulled out his wallet, fumbled with it. His fingers were trembling again. 20, he said. 20,000 cash today. I was backing toward the stairs now. My heart was slamming against my ribs and I couldn't get a full breath. I need to finish the inspection. You need to leave. I took the stairs 2 at a time. Dennis followed me up through the kitchen to the front door. I remember the sound of my car keys jingling in my hand because I couldn't hold them steady. I'll have the report done by Monday, I managed to say. He just stood there in the doorway, watching me walk to my car. I drove 3 blocks before I had to pull over because I couldn't stop shaking. Here's the thing. I got home, and I looked up those dates, the ones circled on his calendar. March 14th, 2009. A college student from Millbrook, Jennifer Reese, went missing after leaving a bar. Never found. July 22nd, 2011. A hiker, Michael Torres, disappeared from a trail 10 miles outside town. No trace. October 9th, 2013. Sarah Pellman, a waitress, vanished after her shift. Her car was found in a parking lot, keys still in the ignition. I went through 15 years of local news archives that night. Every circled date matched a missing person case. Every single one. I filed my report the next morning. Included everything. The photos, the calendar, the patches in the floor. I noted the dimensions. 4 feet by 6 feet. The average size of a grave. I copied my supervisor, the claims director, and I blind copied a detective I knew from a previous fraud case. Dennis called me 4 times that day. I didn't answer. The police went to his house on Tuesday.
I don't know what they found because the case is sealed, but Dennis hasn't been back. His house sits empty now, and there's crime scene tape across the basement windows. I drive past it every day on my way to work. Sometimes I see vehicles there, unmarked cars, a forensics van once. They've been excavating the basement. I can see the torn-up concrete through the window, the dark earth underneath. I can't sleep right. Every time I close my eyes, I see those patches. I count them. I try to match them to the circled dates, to the faces in the missing persons reports. The math doesn't work out. There were more patches than dates, which means either I missed some or there are people down there no one's reported missing yet. I don't know which possibility makes me feel sicker. They haven't told me anything official, but last week I saw the detective I'd emailed and she just looked at me and said, "You did the right thing." Her voice was hollow when she said it, like she'd seen something that emptied her out. I submitted my resignation yesterday. I can't do this job anymore, can't walk into people's basements and wonder what's under the floor. My hands still shake when I hold a camera. I'm looking at my neighbors' houses differently now, watching how they move, how they act, wondering what's buried under all that normalcy. And Dennis's house just sits there 3 doors down from mine with its neat lawn and dark windows. They still haven't removed all the concrete. I was renting this small house near campus during finals week last spring, one of those converted garage setups behind a main property. The landlord lived in the front house with his wife. Quiet couple, maybe in their 60s. We'd exchange nods when I saw them in the driveway, nothing more. The first note appeared on a Tuesday morning. I found it slipped under my door when I got up around 7. Just a folded piece of lined paper, the kind you'd tear from a spiral notebook. The handwriting was careful, almost calligraphic. Your porch light remained on until 3:14 a.m. Please be more mindful of energy consumption. I figured it was the landlord being passive-aggressive about the electric bill. Fair enough. I'd fallen asleep studying and forgotten to turn it off. I made a mental note to be more careful and threw the paper away. The second note came Thursday, same paper, same handwriting. The bathroom faucet ran for approximately 11 minutes yesterday at 2:30 p.m. Please check for leaks or ensure proper closure. That one made me pause. I had taken a long shower around that time, yeah, but 11 minutes felt oddly specific. Still, sound travels. Maybe they could hear the pipes. I texted my landlord an apology about water usage. He responded with a confused emoji and "no worries, pay flat rate for utilities." The notes kept coming. Every couple of days, sometimes daily. Always slipped under the door, always on that same lined paper. You paced in the kitchen for 23 minutes last night between 1:15 and 1:38 a.m. The microwave was used 4 times yesterday, 3 times for beverages, once for food. You spoke aloud to yourself for approximately 6 minutes this morning. The dog next door barked 4 times, not 3. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I confront them? Here's the thing. The details were so mundane, so trivial that bringing them up felt insane. What was I supposed to say? Please stop counting how many times I use my microwave. It felt like complaining about someone breathing too loud. But the specificity started getting to me. I began paying attention to my own habits, cross-referencing them with the notes. The timings were always accurate. The counts were always correct. When a note said I'd turned on the kitchen light at 4:47 a.m., I checked my phone's timestamp from when I'd gotten up to pee, 4:47 exactly. The first note that truly bothered me came on a Sunday. You opened the refrigerator 6 times between 9 p.m. and midnight, but only removed items twice. Please be more decisive to conserve energy. That wasn't something you could hear from another building. The refrigerator was against an interior wall, no windows nearby. I stood in my kitchen that night, staring at the fridge, trying to figure out the angle. Their house was a good 30 feet away, separated by a fence and hedge. No direct line of sight to any of my windows except the bathroom, and even that was frosted glass. I started closing all my curtains. Every window, every night, checked twice. The notes continued. You worked at your desk for 3 hours and 14 minutes yesterday without standing. Please remember to stretch. My desk faced an interior wall. No windows, no way to see it from outside. You checked your phone 47 times today. Screen time is important to monitor. I kept my phone face down when I wasn't using it. I started putting it in drawers. The shower ran for 18 minutes this morning. You spent 4 minutes standing still before beginning to wash. My hands were shaking when I read that one. The bathroom window was frosted, positioned high on the wall. Even if someone was standing directly outside, which I would have heard, they couldn't see through it. And the detail about standing still, that moment of exhaustion where I'd just let the hot water run over me before actually starting my shower routine, that was such a specific, private thing. I confronted my landlord that afternoon, brought the stack of notes I'd been keeping. He and his wife met me at their front door, and I watched their faces as they read through them. The confusion looked genuine. Too genuine. Thomas, we didn't write these, his wife said. She had this uncomfortable laugh. This is someone watching you very closely. Could someone have accessed the house? I asked. Spare keys, maintenance workers, anything? We're the only ones with keys. We haven't had any work done in months. I asked if they'd seen anyone around my door. They hadn't. I asked if they had security cameras. They didn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with every light on, listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. The soft sound of paper sliding against wood. I was at the door in seconds, yanked it open. Nothing. No one. The street was empty, the driveway was empty, the yard was still, just that piece of paper on my doormat. You are sitting in the living room, all lights are on. You have been awake for 19 hours. I was holding that note when I noticed the timestamp issue. It was 2:07 a.m. when I opened the door. The note said I'd been awake for 19 hours. I'd woken up yesterday at 7 a.m. The math was exactly right, down to the minute. Whoever wrote this had been watching me stand up, walk to the door, and read it. They were close enough to slide it under the door and vanish in the 3 seconds it took me to cross the room. I moved out 2 days later, broke the lease, lost my deposit, didn't care. I spent those 2 days packing during daylight hours and sleeping, barely, at a friend's place. The last note appeared the morning I was loading my car. You are leaving. You packed 14 boxes, 3 suitcases, 1 backpack. You will take 4 trips to your car. This is trip number 2. I was holding a box when I found it. I'd made 1 trip already. I dropped the box and got in my car, left everything else. The landlord could deal with it. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. Those notes were always past tense. You paced for 23 minutes last night. The faucet ran for 11 minutes yesterday. Observations of things I'd already done, except that last one. That one was present tense, real time, and it predicted what I was about to do, 4 trips, before I decided it myself. I worked night shifts at a big box grocery store, stocking shelves mostly, which means I'm there until 2, sometimes 3 in the morning. For context, I'm a pretty practical guy. I don't look for mysteries. I just want to finish my shift, eat something that isn't from the deli section, and get some sleep before doing it all again. About 4 months ago, I started taking my dinner breaks in my car. Not in the employee lot, across the street in this little turnaround spot that faces my apartment building. It's quieter there, and I can see my window, make sure nobody's messing with my stuff. The building's old, one of those boxy 3-story places with thin walls and a shared laundry room that always smells like mildew. I live on the 2nd floor. My neighbor directly below me is this guy named Mr. Hemlock. I'd seen him maybe twice before all this started. Older guy, 60s probably, always in these brown cardigans that looked like they came from an estate sale. Kept to himself. The kind of neighbor you're grateful for because you never hear him. Oh. The first time I noticed something off was mid-October. I was sitting in my car around 11:30 at night eating a sandwich, and I saw Mr. Hemlock's front door open. He came out and walked to his car, an old sedan, beige, covered in pollen, and pulled out 2 grocery bags. Not unusual, except he didn't go to his kitchen. I watched him walk straight to his living room window, the one I can see clearly from where I park, and he set the bags down in front of his fireplace. Then he started unpacking them, slowly, methodically. Cans of soup, boxes of pasta, bags of rice. One by one, he placed each item directly into the fireplace, not on the mantel, not beside it, inside it where you'd normally stack logs. I figured maybe he was reorganizing, clearing counter space or something. People do weird things when they live alone, but he kept going for maybe 20 minutes, lining up cans in neat rows along the back wall of the firebox, stacking boxes on top. When he finished, he stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, looking at his work. Then he reached up and closed the flue with this careful, deliberate motion, like he was sealing something valuable inside a safe. I didn't think much of it, or I told myself I didn't. 2 nights later, I was back in the same spot, same time, same routine. And there he was again. 2 more bags, same process. More cans, green beans this time, I think, and something in red labels I couldn't make out from the distance. He added them to the fireplace, building the stack higher, tighter. He closed the flue again when he was done. It became a pattern. Every few nights, like clockwork, Mr. Hemlock would come home late with groceries and pack them into that fireplace. I started timing my breaks to watch. I know how that sounds. But here's the thing. It wasn't curiosity, not really. It was this creeping sense that something about it was wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. By mid-November, the fireplace was nearly full. I could see it from my car, even in the dim light from his living room lamp. The entire firebox was crammed with food. Cans stacked 3 deep, boxes wedged into every gap. He'd started placing items on their sides to fit more in, and none of it ever moved. I never saw him take anything out, never saw him eat any of it. The food just sat there, sealed behind the flue, like he was building something. I started coming home during the day sometimes, just to check if maybe he was unpacking it when I wasn't around. But no, the fireplace stayed full. The curtains stayed drawn most of the time, but on the rare occasion they were open, I could see that wall of canned goods through the grate, untouched. Then one night in late November, I remember because it was the week before Thanksgiving, I was in my car finishing a bag of chips, and I saw him come out with another load. But this time he only had 1 bag, and it looked light. He went inside, and I watched him walk to the fireplace. He didn't unpack anything. He just stood there, staring at it. For a long time. Maybe 5 minutes. I checked my phone twice, and when I looked back up, he was still standing in the same spot, perfectly still. Then he reached into the bag and pulled something out. I couldn't tell what it was at first. Small, flat. He held it up in front of him, and that's when I realized it was a picture frame. But it was empty. No photo inside, just the glass and the backing. He held it there, at chest height, facing the fireplace, like he was showing it to someone who wasn't there. And then he turned. Not toward the window exactly, but enough that I could see his face in profile. He was looking outside, looking at my car. I don't know why, but I froze. My hand was halfway to the ignition, but I didn't move. Couldn't. He stood there holding that empty frame, and even though I couldn't see his eyes clearly from that distance, I knew he was looking at me. Not just in my direction. At me. He stayed like that for maybe 10 seconds. Then he lowered the frame, turned back to the fireplace, and set it on the mantel. He closed the curtains. I sat there in my car for another 20 minutes before I could make myself drive the 30 feet to the parking lot. I haven't seen him bring groceries in since then. The curtains stay closed now, day and night. But 2 weeks ago, I was coming home from my shift around 3 in the morning and I smelled something in the stairwell. Not rot, not exactly. It was more like the smell of a pantry that's been sealed too long, stale air and cardboard and something faintly metallic underneath. It was coming from his apartment. I stood outside his door for a minute, trying to convince myself to knock to ask if he was okay. But I didn't. I went upstairs, locked my door, and I haven't gone back down since, unless I absolutely have to. Last week I noticed something else. There's a flyer taped to the bulletin board in the laundry room, one of those missing person notices. A guy in his 20s, last seen in early October. I don't know why I looked closer, but I did. The address listed was 2 buildings over. The photo on the flyer showed him standing in front of a fireplace. I don't park across the street anymore.